I once spent an afternoon on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee, atop the mount where Jesus is believed to have preached his most famous sermon. It was an infernally hot day, and the sanctuary where I sat was crowded with Christian pilgrims from many continents. Some gathered silently in the shade, while others staggered about in the sun taking photographs. As I gazed at the surrounding hills, a feeling of peace came over me. It soon grew to a blissful stillness that silenced my thoughts. In an instant, the sense of being a separate self, an I or a me, vanished. Everything was as it had been: the cloudless sky, the brown hills sloping to an inland sea, the pilgrims clutching their bottles of water. But I no longer felt separate from the scene, peering out at a world from behind my eyes. Only the world remained. The experience lasted just a few seconds, but it returned many times as I looked out over the land where Jesus is believed to have walked, gathered his apostles, and worked many of his miracles. If I were a Christian, I would undoubtedly have interpreted this experience in Christian terms. I might believe that I had glimpsed the oneness of God, or had been touched by the Holy Spirit. If I were a Hindu, I might think in terms of Brahman, the eternal self, of which the world and all individual minds are thought to be a mere modification. If I were a Buddhist, I might talk about the Dharmakaya of emptiness, in which all apparent things manifest as in a dream. But I am simply someone who is making his best effort to be a rational human being. Consequently, I am very slow to draw metaphysical conclusions from experiences of this sort. And yet I glimpse what I will call the intrinsic selflessness of consciousness every day, whether at a traditional holy site, or at my desk, or while having my teeth cleaned. This is not an accident. I've spent many years practicing meditation, the purpose of which is to cut through the illusion of the self. My goal in this chapter and the next is to convince you that the conventional sense of self is an illusion, and that spirituality largely consists in realizing this moment to moment. There are logical and scientific reasons to accept this claim, but recognizing it to be true is not a matter of understanding these reasons. Like many illusions, the sense of self disappears when closely examined, and this is done through the practice of meditation. Once again, I am suggesting an experiment that you must conduct for yourself, in the laboratory of your own mind, by paying attention to your experience in a new way. The Buddha's famous parable meant to denigrate mere intellectualism seems apropos here. A man is struck in the chest with a poisoned arrow. A surgeon rushes to his side to begin the work of saving his life. But the man resists these ministrations. He first wants to know the name of the fletcher who fashioned the arrow's shaft, the genus of the wood from which it was cut, the disposition of the man who shot it, the name of the horse upon which he rode, and 1,000 other things that have no bearing upon his present suffering or his ultimate survival. The man needs to get his priorities straight. His commitment to thinking about the world results from a basic misunderstanding of his predicament. And though we may be only dimly aware of it, we too have a problem that will not be solved by acquiring more conceptual knowledge. Little has changed since the Buddha's time. Many people claim to have no interest at all in spiritual life. Indeed, most scientists and philosophers disdain the subject, for it suggests a neglect of intellectual standards. Bliss, it has been noted, is not conducive to detached observation. And yet we are all seeking fulfillment while living at the mercy of changing experience. Whatever we acquire in life gets dispersed. Our bodies age. Our relationships fall away. Even the most intense pleasures last only a few moments. And every morning, we are chased out of bed by our thoughts. In this chapter, I will invoke a variety of concepts that have yet to do much useful work in our study of the natural world, or even of the brain, but do very heavy lifting throughout the course of our lives. Concepts such as self and ego and I. Admittedly, these terms appear less than scientific, but we have no new words with which to name and subsequently study one of the most striking features of our existence. Most of us feel that our experience of the world refers back to a self, not to our bodies precisely, but to a center of consciousness that exists somehow interior to the body, behind the eyes, inside the head. The feeling that we call I seems to define our point of view in every moment, and it also provides an anchor for popular beliefs about souls and freedom of will. And yet this feeling, however imperturbable it may appear at present, can be altered, interrupted, or entirely abolished. Such transformations run the gamut from run-of-the-mill psychosis to spiritual epiphany. What makes me the same person I was 5 minutes ago, or yesterday, or on my 18th birthday? Is it that I remember being those former selves, and my memories are somewhat accurate? In fact, I've forgotten most of what has happened to me over the course of my life, and my body has been gradually changing all the while. Is it enough to say that I'm physically continuous with my former selves, because most of the cells in my body are the same as or descended from those that made up the bodies of those younger men? As we have seen, the split brain phenomenon puts pressure on the very idea of personal identity. But things can get even worse. In a now famous thought experiment, the philosopher Derek Parfit asks us to imagine a teleportation device that can beam a person from Earth to Mars. Rather than travel many months on a spaceship, you need only enter a small chamber close to home and push a green button, and all the information in your brain and body will be sent to a similar station on Mars, where you will be reassembled down to the last atom. Imagine that several of your friends have already traveled to Mars this way, and seem none the worse for it. They describe the experience as being one of instantaneous relocation. You push the green button and find yourself standing on Mars, where your most recent memory is of pushing the green button on Earth and wondering if anything would happen. So you decide to travel to Mars yourself. However, in the process of arranging your trip, you learn a troubling fact about the mechanics of teleportation. It turns out that the technicians wait for a person's replica to be built on Mars before obliterating his original body on Earth. This has the benefit of leaving nothing to chance. If something goes wrong in the replication process, no harm has been done. However, it raises the following concern. While your double is beginning his day on Mars, with all your memories, goals, and prejudices intact, you will be standing in the teleportation chamber on Earth, just staring at the green button. Imagine a voice coming over the intercom to congratulate you for arriving safely at your destination. In a few moments, you are told, your Earth body will be smashed to atoms. How would this be any different from simply being killed? To most readers, this thought experiment will suggest that psychological continuity, the mere maintenance of one's memories, beliefs, habits, and other mental traits, is an insufficient basis for personal identity. It's not enough for someone on Mars to be just like you. He must actually be you. The man on Mars will share all your memories and will behave exactly as you would have, but he is not you, as your continued existence in the teleportation chamber on Earth attests. To the Earth you, awaiting obliteration, teleportation as a means of travel will appear a horrifying sham. You never left Earth and are about to die. Your friends, you now realize, have been repeatedly copied and killed, and yet the problem with teleportation is somehow not obvious if a person is disassembled before his replica is built. In that case, it's tempting to say that teleportation works, and that he is really stepping onto the surface of Mars. One might conclude that personal identity requires physical continuity. I'm identical to my brain and body, and if they get destroyed, that's the end of me. But Parfit shows that physical continuity matters only because it normally supports psychological continuity. Merely hanging on to one's brain and body cannot be an end in itself. Just consider the unfortunate case of someone with advanced dementia. He is physically but not psychologically continuous with the person he used to be. If he could be given new neurons that would emulate the old ones in his healthy brain, restoring his memories, creativity, sense of humor, this would be far better than keeping his current neurons that are succumbing to neurodegenerative disease. If we grant that the gradual replacement of individual neurons would be compatible with continued consciousness, it seems clear that the maintenance of psychological continuity is what we care about, and it is generally what we mean by a person's survival from one moment to the next. Parfit pushes the concept of personal identity about as far as it can go, and resolves the apparent paradox of teleportation by arguing that, quote, identity is not what matters. Rather, we should be concerned only about psychological continuity. However, he also states that psychological continuity cannot take a, quote, branching form, or at least not for long, as it does when a person is copied on Mars while the original person survives on Earth. Parfit believes that we should view the teleportation case in which a person is destroyed before being replicated as more or less indistinguishable from the normal pattern of personal survival throughout our lives. After all, in what way are you subjectively the same as the person who first began listening to this book? In the only way that you can be, by displaying some degree of psychological continuity with that past self. Viewed in this way, it is difficult to see how teleportation is any different from the mere passage of time. As Parfit says, quote, I want the person on Mars to be me in a specially intimate way in which no future person will ever be me. What I fear will be missing is always missing. Ordinary survival is about as bad as being destroyed and replicated. Here Parfit does not mean bad in the sense that we should find these truths depressing. He is merely arguing that ordinary survival from moment to moment is no more demonstrative of personal identity than destruction and replication would be. Parfit's view of the self, which he appears to have arrived at independently through an immensely creative use of thought experiments, is essentially the same as the one found in the teachings of Buddhism. There is no stable self that is carried along from one moment to the next. I agree with most of what Parfit has to say about personal identity. However, because his view is purely the product of logical argument, it can seem uncannily detached from the reality of our lives. Although experience and meditation may not immediately resolve the teleportation paradox, or make it clear why one should care about one's future experience any more than that of a stranger, it can make these philosophical problems easier to think about. When talking about psychological continuity, we are talking about consciousness and its contents, the persistence of autobiographical memories in particular. Everything that is personal, everything that differentiates my consciousness from that of another human being, relates to the contents of consciousness. Memories, perceptions, attitudes, desires, these are appearances in consciousness. If my consciousness were suddenly filled with the contents of your life, if I awoke this morning with your memories, hopes, fears, sensory impressions, and relationships, I would no longer be me. I would be the same as your clone in the teleportation case. My consciousness is, quote, mine, only because the particularities of my life are illuminated as and where they arise. For instance, I currently have an annoying pain in my neck, the result of a martial arts injury. Why is this my pain? Why am I the only one who is directly aware of it? These questions are a symptom of confusion. There is no I who is aware of the pain. The pain is simply arising in consciousness in the only place it can arise, at the conjunction of this brain and this neck. Where else could this particular pain be felt? If I were cloned through teleportation, an identical pain might be felt in an identical neck on Mars, but this pain would still be right here in this neck. Whatever its relation to the physical world, consciousness is the context in which the objects of experience appear. The sound of my reading this book, the sensation of your back against a chair. There is nowhere else for them to appear. For their very appearance is consciousness in action, and anything that is unique to your experience of the world must appear amid the contents of consciousness. We have every reason to believe that these contents depend upon the physical structure of your brain. Duplicate your brain, and you will duplicate, quote, your contents in another field of consciousness. Divide your brain, and you will segregate these contents in bizarre ways. We know from experiments both real and imagined that psychological continuity is divisible, and can therefore be inherited by more than one mind. If my brain were surgically divided by colossotomy tomorrow, this would create at least two independent conscious minds, both of which would be psychologically continuous with the person who is now writing this paragraph. If my linguistic abilities happen to be distributed across both hemispheres, each of these minds might remember having written this sentence. The question of whether I would land in the left hemisphere or the right doesn't make sense, being based as it is on the illusion that there is a self bobbing on the stream of consciousness like a boat on the water. But the stream of consciousness can divide and follow both tributaries simultaneously. Should these tributaries converge again, the final current would inherit the memories of each. If, after years of living apart, my hemispheres were reunited, their memories of separate existence could in principle appear in the combined memory of a single consciousness. There would be no cause to ask where my self had been while my brain was divided, because no I exists apart from the stream. The moment we see this, the divisibility of the human mind begins to seem less paradoxical. Subjectively speaking, the only thing that actually exists is consciousness and its contents, and the only thing relevant to the question of personal identity is psychological continuity from one moment to the next.